Thanks, and welcome to this workshop on cultural engagement through digitalization as a driver for a clean energy transition. This workshop is aimed at exploring the challenges, gaps, and also already in place experiences that connect these three, say, big different challenges related with energy transition, that is using cultural and not conventional channels to increase engagement of citizens, and the role that digitalization could play to foster this engagement. And the plan in the next 90 minutes, we will have the pleasure to hear from well-experienced researchers and practitioners. And we will start from an opening speech given by Isilde Costanzo that will frame a bit the rest of the workshop in terms of the perimeter of the discussion. Just a few words about who we are. We are a joint program, that means a research network belonging to the European Energy Research Alliance Consortium. The EERA Consortium is maybe the widest consortium in Europe that group almost 250 research organizations, so not only academic bodies, but also other public and private research institutes that are all committed with the challenges of energy transition. Most of our research networks that we call joint programs, and you see in the bottom right of the slide, we have 18 of these research network or joint program. Most of them are focused on specific renewable energy technologies. So we span from bioenergy to photovoltaic to geothermal and so on. Among these research networks, there are some joint programs that are more transversal, like the AMPIA joint program that is about materials or digitization for energy. That is another transversal joint program that is focused on digitalization. And last but not least, the E3S joint program, the Clean Energy Transition for Sustainable Societies, that is actually the research network that promoted this workshop today. And the E3S, And the E3S joint program that I have the pleasure and the honor to coordinate, actively supported by Margherita Menon, is the SSH, joint program in the EERA consortium. And our main mission is properly to advance research and provide not only EERA and the other joint programs, but the wider scientific and policy community with new evidences, knowledge, and hopefully useful tools to address the SSH E challenges. The E stands, of course, for environment. So our ambition is also to go beyond, in a way, the SSH environment and moving to actually assessing also the other sustainability challenges. Our joint program is organized in 5 sub-programs. Of course, no time to go in depth, but you find in the website and all the information that you might need, all the curiosity that you might have could be easily addressed by also sending us an email. You will find at the end of the presentation our references. The sub-programs try to cover all the different angles of the SSH challenges. We have one sub-program focused on demand reduction. The second is more focused on the just transition and governance challenges. Then we have a specific sub-program dedicated to a holistic approach to energy transition. That is the third. And we move to the market regulation and business model with the subprogram 4, and then we have a more methodological, how to say, subprogram that is the 5th, mostly energy modeling subprogram aimed at exploring a transition pathway. This workshop actually is framed into the in between the subprogram 1 and 2, because actually our aim is to explore, as I was saying before, how the cultural engagement, how the cultural and creative industries might play as a leverage for engaging citizens, with the ambition of promoting behavioral changes and, if possible, as much as possible, responsible behavior and demand reduction. So this is the panel we have the honor to host today, and I would take advantage of this introduction just to really thank all of them. And the first on the left top of the slide is Isilde Costanzo, to which I'm hand over immediately to give the framing, let's say, introductory speech to this workshop. Isilde, with a background in building engineering and cultural heritage management and innovation, is currently a senior researcher at EERA, the Italian National Agency for New Technologies. And Isilde mostly focuses on research on energy technologies and policies for the built environment. As many of us is, of course, managing a lot of EU and international projects. So I would say the floor is yours, Isilde, for the next 10 to 12 minutes. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. So in the framework that Alessandro presented, we have performed an investigation on cultural engagement for behavioral change among the members of the E3S joint programs. But before presenting the results of first exploration, let me mention some premises why this topic. We all know that socio-cultural norms affect the likelihood of consumers to change their energy-related behaviors when purchasing products or in everyday activities, for example, transport mode or cooling and heating habits. And from a preliminary desk review that was performed last year, we know that the role of culture for climate empowerment is now somehow widely recognized. There is a growing engagement for climate from the cultural and creative sector, led by a growing demand from young generations, from enterprises to improve their image, and even from policymakers to implement and monitor their climate and energy policies. But even if there is some evidence that cultural engagement can impact pro-environmental and energy-saving behaviors, the attempt to quantify effectiveness has not progressed. There is a dialogue and collaboration somehow, and it is still recommended, but it's somehow occasional. And I'm speaking about the dialogue and collaboration within the cultural sector and the science and research one. Also, there is evidence, and we do believe that digitalization and the Internet of Things open up opportunities for creating awareness and acquiring information from citizens. For example, interactions in immersive environments or in smart cities services. And that's the reason of our working group on this topic that has been established within the joint program. There has been a long-lasting call for multidisciplinary approaches, started from the relaunch of the Action for Climate Empowerment, recognizing the role of culture in the Paris Agreement through the Culture for 2030 agenda from UNESCO, through also the declaration, the important declaration of Rome G20 Ministers of Culture, somehow inviting nations to include the culture in their energy and climate policies. And of course, we do know that the European Union has introduced this topic in its culture and the research agendas with growing synergy, for example, starting from the ERA research policy agenda. And especially the new European Bauhaus accompanies the new transition overcoming silos between creativity, sociology, technology, and behavior change is to be achieved. It's a short-term goal to be achieved through research, educational programs, citizen science, and inclusive stakeholder participation. I'm mentioning the NEB Nexus report. Apparently, there is also funding for the NEP within the next work programs of Horizon Europe in the new NEB facility within the new Horizon Europe strategy. And what is important is that also a network of important international organizations presented an action and an advice, somehow an advocacy action that resulted in the Emirates declaration on culture-based climate action that should live in a joint culture and climate action in next COP30. So these were the premises about the results of the survey that we led to know what's the level of knowledge, experience, and interest in this topic among the E3S. We had 16 experts responding from 13 research organizations in 8 different European countries. The educational background is both social and humanistic and STEM. And maybe also the presence of a majority of engineers reveals somehow a social science and humanities turn in hard and applied sciences. Let's have somehow an insight to the details of the replies. When we asked, do you have any experience with culture-based actions to raise awareness or promote behavioral change about sustainability and energy issues, the respondents declared that they or their organization have carried out such citizens engagement initiatives within the third mission, the institutional third mission, for example, in Green Campus or in commitment to SDGs. Also, they have performed such initiatives in different EU projects, and that is 70% that declares they do have experience, or in PhDs, or in education and awareness raising campaigns. That's the case, for example, of the Italian campaign to implement the Energy Efficiency Directive that was performed with the national TV and art people and reached 4 million people in 1 year in 2018, or for example, a summer school on climate change, on cultural practices and socioeconomic outcomes in the University of Bologna, or some initiatives in Oxford University, which is used to have initiatives with the theaters, libraries, museums, are not formally included in research nor evaluated, but for example, they launched this Museum of Climate Hope as an education project. In other cases, there are public engagement observatories, for example, the one from UKirk or the one from the University of Groningen, where somehow there is an interest of research, and it's a platform for knowledge sharing on public participation in local policies and how to better somehow engage different groups and present values. Or also we had artist residencies like the one we had in the AIT in Austria, the Institute of Technology will come later. When we asked which digital tools have been used in your activities, a list of tools have been listed from artificial and extended reality to smart cities, artificial artificial intelligence, social media, citizen science. For example, about artificial intelligence, we have the example of IFPEN in France that used it for communicating science on geoheritage, which is linked to the spread of technologies like CCS, carbon and capture storage, or energy storage, or geothermal technologies, or even extraction of materials for energy. Or also artificial intelligence was used in the tech ethos serious experience, or also in the artist residence experience with some artists from Berlin called Token for Climate Care, where symbols are generated by artificial intelligence based on a database of words and images linked to energy and climate, and the audience can be engaged through an app that makes use of these symbols. To mention smart cities applications, for example, the Urban Innovation Action Data in Ravenna, in the ancient harbor, which is heritage for the city, developed a smart digitally equipped district using e-democracy platform by part that allows citizens publishing ideas, building synergies, and voting for the best vision. And the artists were involved in the facilitation of the experience. Citizen science was performed in different frameworks as well, and the sensors were used in the UARC project, which is mostly a project on risk assessment and climate adaptation rather than mitigation. But when we come to knowledge of other culture-based action, there is somehow a lack of knowledge of other experiences, although publications, websites, initiatives, also with museums of natural history or contemporary arts, as well as green behaviors in fictions have been mentioned. For example, the cooling solution is an outstanding experience from the Department of Economics in Ca' Foscari on use of technologies and habits on cooling and overheating and climate warming. When we come to knowledge of policies enabling culture-based actions to promote behavioral change, there is in our joint program little knowledge on enabling policies beyond those mentioned at the beginning. And when even digitalization policies were not mentioned, although of course we are aware of a series of publications like the one from C40 on exemplary cities combining policy and about climate and culture, or even the observatory being established in ICOMOS on the somehow inclusion of this topic within the climate and energy plans that revealed that most adapting climate adaptation was dealing with heritage and culture rather than mitigation. And also we all know the example of Barcelona that included cultural engagement and heritage in their 2030 climate plan. When we asked if they used methods and tools to measure the effectiveness and impact of such actions, we have a list of rather traditional methods to assess social impact, but the Internet of Things and the digitalization opportunities is not so cited, and the opportunity is not so well known. That reflects the fact that maybe the experiences that were listed were not evaluated in that sense. And yet we know from literature that there is a lot of discussion about digital technologies for behavioral change. We have, for example, systematic mapping on 500 cases that highlight how power metering or immersive reality or gamification can support behavioral change and maybe be used for measurement on population, and the tests were made basically on a population of students and households. So we will see how the building sector can be very interesting in this sense. So when we spoke about the subtopics that are preferred for further investigation, we mainly had the citizen science as an enabler of art science collaboration and behavior change, and also collaboration with the cities and the creative and cultural industries to facilitate co-creation and policy monitoring and evaluation, followed also from better insight into best practices and evaluation methods. To conclude, we can say that although E3 members' experiences in the topic are sometimes occasional and have not been structured in research and innovation strategies, respondents glimpse the benefit of cultural engagement and expressed interest in taking advantage and further investigating research opportunities. For example, with regards to innovating ways to effectively engage citizens, speaking also of inclusion and responsible research, or opportunities and threats of digitalization for behavioral change. Thank you very much, and other topics will be further detailed and discussed later on by our speakers. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Isilde, for having so effectively framed the discussion that will be developed through the further contribution given by our speakers. And I forgot in the beginning to inform the audience about the main rule of this workshop, that is to put any comments, question you might have in the chat, and at the end of the round of presentation, we will have some minutes to get back to your comments and questions in a dedicated, let's say, open discussion about the topics that will be raised and explored. Well, quite well connected with some of the results of the survey and of the reflections that Isilde shared in the presentation, I would kindly ask Professor Pierluigi Sacco to come to the virtual stage to give his contribution about cultural participation and environmentally pro-social behavior. This is the title of the contribution from Professor Sacco. Professor Sacco is currently Professor of Behavioral Economics at the Department of Neuroscience, University of Chieti Pescara, Italy. He is also, well, it would take quite half a day to read the biography of Professor Sacco, but to be very short, he's also senior advisor of the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities, affiliate researchers at the Meta Lab at Harvard, and at the Policy Evidence Center at Newcastle University. I would stop here, otherwise really it will take too long and it will be just waste of time respect of your contribution. Please, Professor Sacco, the floor is yours for the next 10 to 12 minutes.
Absolutely, Alessandro. Thank you very much. So the main goal of my short talk is to give you some ideas about why the behavioral change and cultural participation connection is so important. in the context of the literature on behavioral change, then to give some concrete examples from a project that is probably the most ambitious project to date, to try to bring environmental pro-social behaviors into the European scene, which is Bourges 2028, the European Capital of Culture for France. In 2028, that is a project entirely revolving around the idea of radical sustainability, of which I am the president. So I have, I think, an interesting perspective to tell about this. So first of all, clearly, the big challenge of circularity thinking is the behavioral change dimension. It's been already mentioned. But
I'm sorry, Professor Pierluigi, if I can interrupt
yes.
you, because I don't know if you're sharing the screen because...
No, I don't have
okay,
slides.
Okay, fine. Sorry for that.
Yeah, it's better for me not to.
I fully agree with you. Please proceed. Sorry for interrupting.
The literature on behavioral change shows that behavioral change is not easy at all. And in particular, of course, we can aim at, let's say, making people more sensitive, more attentive towards these issues. But in practice, this is very difficult. In some sense, there is a gap between the technological level of sustainability, where we are really learning something useful and we have models and solutions, and the behavioral dimensions in which we are really lagging behind. Because of course there is a lot of wishful thinking, sometimes rhetorics around this, but we have not so many viable examples, and especially examples that scale up. Why? Well, the literature on behavioral change in the last couple of decades has been dominated by a paradigm. There is a paradigm that has several different labels, but probably the most popular, the most resounding in public debates is the so-called nudging paradigm. The idea that you can make small changes in the context of choice to induce people to change their line of behavior by appealing in some sense to their rational line of thinking, by in some sense neutralizing the emotional response that generally is meant to be an impulsive response in which people do not really think clearly about the consequences of their choices. So this is, I have to make a long story short. There is a vision of behavior and human nature behind this approach, but according to this vision that has been widely popularized by Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, there should be a sort of dualism between quick systems, the so-called system one in Kahneman terminology, that are systems that are driven by emotions, and they are impulsive, in which people simply react on the basis of what is their gut feeling. And then there are these system two kind of processes in which people can use a rational deliberation, but in order to do this, they have in some sense to neutralize the emotional quick response. What do we have learned from the literature on nudging? Well, there are many meta-analyses today that can be carried out because there have been many experiments in this regard. And we have learned two things. First, the size of the effects of this nudging intervention of average are very small. So if any change happens, is a small change. And sometimes for the imperatives of climate change especially, small change is almost no change. So we cannot be happy with small changes in this regard. But what is even more concerning is the second part. Whatever the size of the effect, these particular kinds of change vanish very quickly. So even if people change their attitude for a while, they fall back to the initial attitude very quickly. Why? Well, what we are learning from, let's say, a sort of a new wave of behavioral change studies is that probably the big flaw of this kind of approach is considering emotion a sort of bias. Emotions are important for behavioral change, are dramatically important for the simple reason that emotions are systems that not only humans, but the animal realm at least, has developed to signal relevance, to signal salience. When something hits us emotionally, as a consequence, we pay attention. not only we pay attention, but we remember, because emotions, from this point of view, is really a way to select those experiences that are worthwhile to be transmitted into the long-term memory. I think that if any of you interrogates themselves in terms of memorable experiences, I'm ready to bet that all of them will have a strong emotional content. So, what is the alternative? What can we propose as an alternative to this nudging and more generally, let's say, rational choice deliberation kind of approaches? Well, art interventions are a very good candidate. And they are a very good candidate for the simple reason that they recruit emotion in a massive way. By the way, this is not something. In some sense, the arts have been related to behavioral change throughout human history. The problem is that we have attached to arts a different meaning in the last couple of centuries, in which the arts were relegated into the realm of entertainment, free time, which of course is nothing bad, but this is clearly not at all spanning the complexity and the value that the artistic experiences have for humans. So, what happens through a arts intervention is that if we can recruit an emotional response from people that, by the way, is not by all means contraposed to an idea of a cognitive response, but we really need to stimulate them simultaneously, the consequence is that probably we will have a stronger basis for behavioral change. And by the way, the preliminary experiments that we have in this regard are particularly promising, both in terms of size of the effect and in terms of durability of the effect. From this point of view, of course, the digital participation plays a big role, especially if we are interested in environmental sustainability. Because the problem is that not everybody can travel everywhere to participate to meaningful experiences. But if they are digitally transmitted or they are accessible through digital platforms, this means that so many more people are actually able to take advantage of these experiences than those who can access them directly in person. And in particular, the project of Bourges 2028, the European Capital of Culture 2028, has the ambition to become the first large-scale global event that takes sustainability seriously from the very beginning. And from the very beginning means that we have an absolute threshold of carbon impact that we cannot trespass. And this is 44,000 tons of CO2 equivalent, not only for the events, but for all the visitors of the event, which is really bold, I admit, but at the same time has led us to start with very, very important agreements, for example, with the French National Railways and lots of different partners across the country and increasingly across Europe, to ensure that we can have a globally sustainable event in the first place. But this is just the frame of the project itself. Although I think it's important to stress also that we will have basically an emission manager in this regard, which really means that this becomes part of the organigram of the event. And to our knowledge, is the first time that a global event has this kind of focus. But let me briefly tell you about three projects that are symbolic of this approach in terms of what it means to propose something that has to do with arts intervention eliciting behavioral change. And they are related to three different types of heritage. The first of the project of the Parliament of Rivers, that is an extension of the project that the artist Camille de Toledo already developed for the River Loire in France. In this particular case, this is literally creating a parliament in which citizens volunteer to take the stance, to take the position of the river, to imagine a political platform for the river in terms of its environmental sustainability. This is particularly important because we know that perspective taking is one of the most powerful techniques, powerful ways to elicit identification with a certain point of view. And clearly, from this point of view, we think that people who will participate in the Parliament of River project will probably look at the river in a completely different way afterwards. And probably this will not be only a temporary change, insofar as you have literally introjected and even built the agenda, the political agenda of the river itself. This will involve 4 different big rivers in Europe: the Dnieper, the Danube, the Oder, and the Rhone, and of course, in addition to the Loire Charente that is already in the initial project. Then we have another project that is the Gare Végétale. In this case, it has to do with physical heritage, railway stations. The idea is to transform many of France's railway stations literally in laboratories for the experimentation of interaction between humans and vegetables, basically humans and plants. And in particular, this means that some of these railway stations will be literally transformed by specific projects, size-specific ones. The Bourges railway station, of course, will be the first. And here we have an extremely ambitious project that will involve an architectural agency, Bento, and a very famous artist, Eva Jospin, and a company, Belgian company called Permafungi, that has developed a very, very interesting new material, the mycelium panels, that is extremely sustainable for building, and that will be used in this specific case, literally to create a new architecture within the Bourges station that will demonstrate the potential of this new material for sustainability and the energetic efficiency of buildings. Of course, insofar as this becomes the architectural frame of the station, it would be very difficult for people to ignore it, and this will create countless possibilities to create site-specific projects within this frame to literally involve to address people from this point of view. And finally, a project called Symbiocene that has to do with the human heritage, in particular the heritage of the societies, the communities, the civilizations that have maintained a relationship with nature that is very different from the one that we have taken as most of our global economy, which means those ancient nations, local ancient nations that have maintained literally a symbiotic relationship with nature. Symbiocene is a concept that has been developed, by the way, by Glenn Albrecht, a famous important philosopher that coined this idea. And Symbiocene will be literally a series of dialogues in which ambassadors from all those communities all around the world will be called to interact with not only with the local community in Bourges, with the French community, but with the European community, to understand together what it means today for these people to live in this symbiotic relationship with nature, with all its contradictions and challenges. Of course, by inviting people from all over the world, we will stick to the carbon constraint that we were considering before. So many of them will not travel by plane, and all in all, of course, all the carbon footprint of the project will be kept under control. These are examples. We don't have yet the actual data from the point of view of behavioral change, because this will be the object of the Bourges project. We will have a very, very sophisticated and, by the way, longitudinal design to evaluate the effect of behavioral change from this point of view. And so at the end of the culture capital after 2028, we will probably have also a playbook in terms of concrete techniques to evaluate this behavioral change, and hopefully also data that show that cultural interventions can make the difference and can scale up also through digital participation of all those who cannot participate directly on the project.
Okay, thanks. Thanks a lot. A lot of information, a lot of inputs that, again, would require like an entire day of a conference to be exploited properly. And well, if I may, just before moving to the next, if I may just ask about the indicators or the assessment of the impact. I know that, as you already said, this is the objective of a project that is a running project, and so some more information about what the effect of this kind of arts intervention on behavioral change will be better assessed and better measured as a result of the project. But still, we have struggled in the past, we are still struggling with the identification of possible even indicators, even before then data, for assessing the impact in terms of behavioral change of any kind of intervention, even the nudge that you at the very beginning of your speech highlighted how the nudge seems not to be that much effective when it comes to duration and when it comes to the size of the effect. But just out of curiosity, what could be some indicators, or what are the indicators for assessing behavioral change that you are now trying to adopt also into the project that you mentioned before? So the big challenge of how to measure the impact on behavioral change.
Thank you, Alessandro, for this question. I will be very brief. In some sense, if we simply ask people whether they change their behavior, we don't have a reliable estimate in this case by questionnaires, because people tend to, if they understand that we desire in some sense that they change their behavior, they will try to basically accommodate our expectation. This doesn't mean that they are really changing their behavior. So the best way is not to ask people, but literally to probe their own biobehavioral indicators, which means, for example, taking saliva samples. From taking saliva samples at different stages, we can really see what happens in terms of the neurochemistry of these people. So we know basically if the experience has touched them deeply in terms, for example, of their motivational systems or not. So they can tell us all they want, but we see very clearly if this works or not. Of course, then we can have also direct observation, but direct observation is difficult. It's not that we can follow these people in their daily life, 24 hours, 7. We really need to have clear signals that are reproducible, that some important shift has happened in their motivational system. And we have techniques for this. Actually, we are also carrying out now a project at Europe, basically a MED project, so from European funding from this point of view, in which we have a comparative evaluation of nudging versus cultural interventions in specific urban settings, in which we're doing exactly this. We are comparing on the fair basis the two kinds of interventions, and we have now also the techniques to really, let's say, sample what really happens in the minds and especially in the bodies of people, and this tells us lots of stories.
Wow, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Maybe there is a wide room also for digitalization to be adopted in terms of grasping, let's say, the effect by observing a continuous observation also of the behavior and of people. And so thanks a lot, Professor Sacco. And I will leave the floor to Christian Klöckner in a second. Christian is currently professor in social and environmental psychology at NTNU, the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, based in Trondheim. And Christian leads the research group for citizen environment and safety, and is mainly focused on research on drivers and barriers towards pro-environmental behavior and innovative environmental communication. And in particular, he has conducted several research projects on art and disruptive environmental communication. So Christian is actually our man, to which I leave the floor for the next 10 to 12 minutes. The title of the presentation is already shared by Christian.
Yes,
please, Christian,
thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this interesting session. And what I want to do, in a way, builds very nicely on the two previous presentations here. So I will dive into one of the projects that I've been involved in or that I led. And this is, I would say, pioneering work, because this was already done a couple of years ago. And we had a similar point of departure as was outlined before. So we saw at that point that there was climate change communication going on, and some people were trying nudging, other people were trying other forms of communication, but we were not really satisfied with the effects that this kind of communication achieved in people. At the same time, we saw that there were more and more artists embarking on the topic of climate change and were making quite substantial claims that art would change people and would change people's behavior and people's minds. And this made us curious, and an artist approached me actually, and we had a discussion, and then this project came out of this initial communication we had. And we wanted to know, what are the things that actually happen when people are confronted with climate change inspired artworks? What happens on the emotional level? What happens on a cognitive level? And can we find some indications of change of intentions and motivations? And can we find some signs of change of behavior? I right away admit we don't have the sophisticated methods that were just mentioned, so we didn't measure any saliva samples. We, like old school psychologists, asked people with all the disadvantages and advantages that has. So the project was called ClimArt, and the first thing that we did was we went to the Art COP 21 in Paris, where there were a lot of artworks presented during the COP 21, and we did a survey study with people that passed by these artworks. They were presented in public space, and we presented a very brief survey to people that passed these artworks. And here you can see a selection of these. In total, we had more than different artworks where we collected data. So some of them were big installations, some of them were small and sophisticated paintings, for example, or photographs. So it was quite a big selection of different types of artwork. And then we tried to find out what is it that actually leads to, in this case, we asked for support for climate policy. And on the one hand, you see that, like the traditional things, environmental attitude, they had a substantial influence on support for climate policy. But, and that's the interesting thing, we also see that if people started reflecting about the artworks they maybe by coincidence encountered on their way home, this also had an impact on support for climate policy. So if they started thinking about, what is this thing there that I see, this picture, this sculpture there, what does it want to tell me? What does it have to do with my world? Then this had a positive impact on supporting climate policies. And as we already heard, emotions were quite important for that. So we could trace these reflections back to the emotional reaction people had to the artworks. And the interesting thing is that this could be both negative and positive emotions caused by being confronted with the artwork, and they both had approximately the same impact on triggering reflection. So it's not said that the emotional reactions need to be negative or need to be positive. If people have an emotional reaction, that has something to say for them starting reflecting about the artwork, and that then in turn might lead to that people also, in our case, supported climate policy. A bit of the effects is mediated by the perceived quality of the artwork, but I don't want to go too much into that detail, but rather look at what are features of the artworks that we found had an impact on these, especially emotional activations here. So we found that the negative emotions were mostly connected to artworks that had a polarizing component. And usually the ones that were bigger created more negative emotions than the smaller and more subtle ones. On the positive emotional side, we see that if the artwork contained something personal by the artist or something that people could identify with, they were responding more positively with emotions to that. Um, the monumental size had a negative impact on positive emotions, and so on. So there were some positive and negative impacts here caused by the way the art was created. But the bottom line is, if they managed to create some emotional responses, then we could see that there was also more reflection about them, and then we could see more support for climate policies. And then from there on, we had the opportunity to have the have money in our project where we could commission an artwork. So we had an international call for an artwork, and we had a long process together with some of the project partners, which were art organizations. And then we selected in the end Michael Pinsky as an artist. He's quite renowned in the area, and he actually visited our research group a couple of times for over a year, and there we discussed our findings from the project and our findings from other projects on communication, and channeled that into the creation of an artwork that is called the pollution pots. And the pollution pots that you can see here in an aerial picture, there are a large installation of 5 geodesic domes that you can walk through. So you can see people can enter these domes and they can walk from dome to dome around the circle here. And in each of the domes, they would experience the air quality of one city on Earth. So they started at the entrance level with Trondheim, where the installation was shown the first time. And then you would go to London, where the artist was based. And then you would go to Sao Paulo. First New Delhi, then Beijing, and then Sao Paulo. And we collaborated with an air research institute to give us, in a way, the recipe for the air. What should it smell like? How should it look like? What should it feel like? To create these simulations of air in different cities. So this created a very bodily experience of how air quality is in different places around the world. We can debate if that is climate change or not. It's related, and people made the connection to climate change immediately when they walked through. And we also got feedback from people that, for example, came from India, that the New Delhi pod actually reminded them of home. So it smelled like home. And we needed to create this smell without killing people, which was quite a challenge. And then we asked people before and after they entered in 2 different places, one in on the first show in Trondheim, where it stood for a couple of weeks, and then it stood a week in the middle of London, and there we did another round of data collection. And afterwards, this installation has traveled the world. So it has been in many different COPs and has been in front of the United Nations, and it has, well, but it's still on tour, and it's visiting a lot of cities and also rural places around the world. What you see here behind all those numbers that psychologists are so happy about is that we measured also the emotional response to this artwork, and we asked people before and after how strong their intentions are to do something against climate change. And what we predict here is the degree of change, the degree of like increase in intentions to do something based on the emotional reaction, the cognitive reactions, and if you put both in together, you would get the numbers here at the back. And what you see is that both are important. So the emotional reactions have an impact, and again, you see that they are relevant all across the board of different types of emotions. So it could be the anger, helplessness that you experience, could also be guilt and shame, but it could also be positive emotions coming that motivate something. And then if you put in the more cognitive, like reflections about things, becoming aware of the consequences of your own behavior, then they also had an important influence here. So again, something pointing to that this experience, this bodily emotional experiences, might trigger a process in people. And then we did some qualitative interviews with people that went through, and what we saw was that if they are exposed to an artwork like the pollution pots, it raises their awareness about the topic, but it also creates a personal emotional experience. And that emotional experience may trigger different things. So it could either be that it actually starts this process of evaluating what is my behavior, what can I change in my behavior. And we had some people that came out of the pollution pots and told us that this was such a strong experience that they now decided to not buy a fossil fuel car, but, well, it was done in Norway, so they said they wanted to buy an electric car. But also for other people, it actually led to that they were trying to deflect or avoid this strong experience and go to inaction again because it was so overwhelming that they didn't know what to do about this. So to end my short input here, art seems to be able to trigger emotional reactions. We see that at least in the self-descriptions here, we weren't able to take physiological measures on that. Art may be a good entry point for stopping and thinking and triggering these like thoughts about what is my behavior, how does that relate to the topic. But art alone will not change people's actions. So it's a starting point for a process. We are not by confronting people with artwork like a pollution pots, it would be quite ambitious to actually expect that people change their real behavior. And I might pour a little water into the wine here. We might not be able to just confront people with artwork to get larger effects and more long-lasting effects than nudging people if we do not follow up this emotional activation with something else, with a more structured process where people actually start translating this activation into behavior change and into a plan for behavior change. And also art events might tend to attract a selection of people. If you flag it as climate art, if you have an exhibition, then the people coming are most likely not the people that you think would most benefit from it. So what I would also suggest here is that these artworks should, as much as possible, be presented in public spaces and interact with people that do not expect to go to see an exhibition on climate art. And with that, I thank you for your attention. And if you want to learn more about the project, which has been ended years ago, you can still go to the ClimeArt website, which you can see here. And I stop sharing now so that you can see me again and I can see you again if I can. Yes, here we go.
And it's a pleasure, as usual, to see you again. Thanks, Christian, a lot for your presentation. I will be plenty of questions, but unfortunately, time is running really fast. And so I would keep for the end of the session if we will still have time.
Yes.
And thanks a lot, Christian, really. I will bother you in any case for details in the next days. And now I would kindly ask to come to the virtual stage the Professor Gulben Kallis. Gulben, yep.
Hello.
Okay, hi Gulben. Gulben is professor and head of the Construction Management Division at the Department of Civil Engineering at Ege University in Izmir. And for many years, she has now been focusing her research interest mostly on data acquisition, big data analysis for intelligent interactive built environments. And as for many of the other speakers, it would take like a couple of days to read the whole biography of Gulben. And so I will leave the floor to Gulben for the next, again, 10 to 12 minutes. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Alessandro, and good afternoon, everyone. Well, I would like to thank all the speakers for their interesting contents. Whereas as a civil engineer, I will not be that probably entertaining. And when I was preparing this presentation, I had difficulty in like finding the intersection of culture, digitalization, and citizen empowerment, because culture has a very wide definition. And the first thing for me was to really find out what culture is from an engineer perspective, which I will tell later. So, sorry. Okay. Why is it important to understand culture? for that, I have to give you an overview of the energy performance gap in buildings and how it is related to our engineering perspective. As you know, the total energy consumption in buildings is substantial, almost reaching up to 40% of the global energy usage. For a multiplicity of reasons, there's generally a gap between predicted and actual performance of a building in use. And in practice, energy consumption tends to be much higher than the predicted one. Addressing this energy performance gap in buildings is vital for enhancing building efficiency, reducing operational costs, improving occupant comfort, and meeting environment goals at the end of the day. But in order to understand this, we have to look at the life cycle of a building. Here is what we use for quantifying the difference from the initial target of energy performance to the actual one. Excuse me, may I ask to mute your microphones? There is some noise in the background which is disturbing. Okay, thanks. When you look at this illustration, you would see the life cycle of a typical building. But there is demolition, of course, as the last phase, but I have to ignore that from the perspective of energy performance. At the design phase, we use building simulation tools to make prediction. There, in that phase, we make simplifications, we make assumptions which might not be correct. So there starts to occur a little bit of deviation. But when it comes to the operation phase, the occupation phase includes humans, which behave very unpredictably. It's not about the systems, it's not about malfunctioning devices, but most of this deviation in the operation phase is attributed to the behavior of occupants. In fact, the results could be as significant as like the deviation could be as much as like 150% up to 250%. This would definitely have implications for running costs, national energy supplies, as well as climate change. So what we have been doing to address this gap, of course, much has been done to improve the accuracy of building energy simulation models and so on. But still, we are much focused on the operation phase and to predict or to make more satisfied occupants so that they would not interfere with the building systems. Nowadays, that's why we use digitalization to address this energy performance gap and accordingly improve energy efficiency in buildings. Of course, the most well-known ones are building management systems or smart buildings, let's say. They have great potential to assist practitioners during operational phase of buildings. And this is done through continuously reporting and analyzing the energy performance. But this is usually, this kind of message is usually conveyed to facility managers or building owners. So we somehow need to include occupants in the loop so that they would actively participate in the energy savings in buildings. But in order to do that, we have to know who is there, what they want, and How can we reach them effectively? This is something that engineers lack, of course, and that's where the potential of collaborative and multidisciplinary work blossoms. When this the digitalization, integration of digitalization, these kind of topics started, we mostly use preset rules, predefined rules, this is kind of ineffective, since each building has specific rules, specific behaviors, specific infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and so on. So after a while, the engineering world started to realize that user-centric, or let's say behavior-based strategies would make more sense, and the rules could be adjusted or defined to let's say to also include some of the cultural context, or rules that could empower people. And with that, we can make digital tools more effective in addressing these regional or building-specific energy challenges. So coming back to culture definition, I would say that culture is a set of practices influencing our design and usage of buildings. For example, these could be some behavioral patterns. For example, how people in different regions use heating, cooling, and lighting systems. Could be my interest while designing, or understanding these behaviors, how they could affect my design. This is kind of how I interpret culture or behaviors, or I don't know, habits of occupants into my design. Of course, energy consumption practices of users are also can also impact my design as an engineer. Or, for example, culture could be perceived as user preferences or requirements from our perspective, because that would require customization and personalization. And it would also affect my ergonomics or comfort standards. Well, culture could be integrated into engineering design from this perspective. So that's why I use culture from that point of view. Okay, so what we have been doing, we have been building smart building systems. We have been building digital platforms and applications using most of the time predictive analytics and AI tools. And recently, we also introduced virtual reality and augmented reality into our design and energy practices. Of course, you know our smart building systems use IoT devices, various sensors, and automation to create intelligent and responsive spaces that can optimize our resources. By resources, I mean light, energy, heat, and so on, while at the same time trying to improve occupant comfort and reduce environmental impact. Well, if you would agree, this is not easy from the building perspective, because even as a civil engineer, I criticize sometimes civil engineering practices, because buildings are so static. We once build it, and then they stay the same for almost like quite a bit big. But on the other hand, people change, the use purposes of buildings change very frequently. So buildings cannot adjust to that change as fast as the environment does. So we need more systems that can adjust and adapt to the changes. So we can provide real-time feedback to our occupants via smart building systems, but those will not be really personalized because people change, occupants change so quickly. One of the one of the most famous smart buildings is the Edge building in Amsterdam. So I'm just going to skip it for the sake of time. And we have digital platforms and applications, of course. These are very efficiently used nowadays. We provide user-friendly apps. We can provide engagement through interactivity, and we can also integrate smart meters into these digital platforms so that the occupants would be able to see how they consume or compare with their colleagues or peers. So this has been in the large scale applied in Stockholm with a smart meter application where the city energy data could be monitored or seen by the citizens. And recently, virtual reality and augmented reality technology has been integrated, which are if you ask me, there is an untapped potential for these technologies, though I cannot say that we are benefiting the most out of these technologies, but still we can offer immersive experiences, interactive learning models, and community engagement through these technologies. One of the real-life examples include some applications in schools and among young people that is focused on raising the awareness of students.
Thank you, Gulben. So I think we have just not so much time for the last speaker, and also just a quick maybe a resume of the day. So of course we can somehow speak about it again, because we belong the two to the E3S network. Thank you very much. I just also wanted to ask you something, but I think that it was somehow suggested by Professor Sacco example on the heritage railway station of Bruges, where a building can also communicate changes to people as a way to engage them, because that was the question. Then I'll make some questions to you apart offline. So I'm going to introduce Antonella Passani, next speaker. Thank you very much, Gulben. So Antonella is partner, she's a PhD. She's partner of and the head of research at T6 Ecosystem, a research and consultancy company based in Rome. She's a social scientist with more than 20 years of experience, and she's dealing with social innovation, co-designing practices, and she's an expert in citizen science. And her intervention will be exactly on this topic, on citizen engagement in science art projects, giving some very outstanding examples. Just to you, Antonella, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let's see. So I will be as brief as possible because I'm conscious of the time, but it's nice to see that some of the topic are really across all the presentation. I will focus mainly on the challenges on assessing impact assessment, of assessing the impact on behavioral change of engagement processes. And as you say, I will talk about citizen science, but also art and science project. And the first assumption is that not all the engagement processes are equal, are the same in terms of duration, but also in terms of what we ask people to do. These influence, to me, according to our experience, influence a lot the potential impact in terms of behavioral change. And is a little bit also linked with what Professor Kluckner said, that sometimes being exposed to an idea, to a necessity of change, that needs to be followed up by action. So, for example, we design in the action project the participatory science life cycle, stressing the potentiality of engaging people not only in data gathering, like for example with IoT or sensors. Normally, this is what we ask our citizens to do, or if they go to an art exposition, then to answer a questionnaire. No, is still data production in one another, but we stressed the necessity to engage them in the problem framing, in the design of the research process, or in the design of the art piece. And we are seeing now in this other project, Impetus, that is up and running and is supporting 125 citizen science projects across Europe and beyond, that the numbers are growing in the sense of enabling the community also to involve people in other things, including policy initiatives, for example. Another dimension to be considered is the online face-to-face dimension. Also, in this case, it depends on what you do online, what you do, how do you do things online, and how do you do things in face-to-face environment. But still, is an important dimension. For example, in the Cresco project, 45 of the people that participated in the face-to-face project are expressing the willingness to change some of their behaviors, versus 16.7 of those that participated online. It's not always like this, but the trend we are observing, let's say, this dynamic in order to be able to gather more information on these. Partly is the emotional component that is needed in behavioral change, that is very difficult to have at the same level online and offline. Very different example, Street Spectra was asking citizens and students to analyze the light spectrum of public lighting. So super specific project about light pollution, a topic that is not high in the agenda of nobody, I would say, but still is very relevant and have a huge impact on biodiversity and also on human health. So saying very specific project. Again, the span here was quite long with the student, especially. They were not only going out with a very easy tool to map the spectrum of the lighting, but also analyzing the data provided by others through an app. So validating the data, curating the data, so going into quite a complex and longer process. And also in this case, the majority were declaring to be willing to change some of their behaviors. Mindbugs is on augmented reality, so this is a nice link with Professor Kalish. Used augmented reality and exhibition for talking about fake news and misinformation, which is another topic that is somehow really correlated to the topic of climate transition, and there is a lot of fake news on this that influence also what we can do through these engagement practices. And also in this case, the majority of the participants were declaring the willing to change their behavior. But as was said, it's very difficult to have behavioral change. Here you see behavioral change is the last, let's say, achieved. These are the results of an action project, the previous one. It's easier, let's say, to provide knowledge, to provide skills, to provide competence, can be somehow feasible to change way of thinking, attitude, and values, at least to a certain extent, at least to declarative extent. So what they say they think, also in terms, also because there is the social pressure that Professor Sacco mentioned, but then behavioral change is more difficult to be considered. Why? First of all, there are a lot of difficulties that are related to measuring impact in general. So time issues, we are requested to analyze impact during the project or just at the end of the project, while impact takes a lot of time. So behavioral change takes time. It's not, if we want to see, we also have to evaluate the duration of such changes. There is a general lack of skills and mindset in terms of impact assessment in project that works on citizen engagement, not because maybe there is not, it's not a lack of willingness, but really the goal of this project is to do the project, or the goal of the artist is to have the art piece, and then the evaluation is an add-on that requires specific skills that are not always there, and also ask for time and resources that very often are not there. For behavioral change, I do not want to we touched upon all of these challenges: perceived versus actual change, what you declare and what you do, etc. Size and replicability, this is central, because most of these projects are locally based, small or medium. How can you take the results and then say, okay, this work or doesn't work? We need to have more, and also bigger, or to find a way to be able to consider all this dimension and the specific characteristic of participants and of the project itself and the processes when we do the analysis. And for us, very, very important, the fact that we risk to engage the usual suspects. So you have a call for measuring energy consumption, and you got people that is interested in the topic, that is motivated, that feel this as a problem, that wants to do something on the problem. So for us, social inclusion is definitely one of the main necessity for all this kind of project. We also say, no, if we do something in a museum, we're already creating a locus that talks by itself and influence the possibility of people of assessing and select the people that will go there. So these are definitely, inclusivity is really, really an important topic in all this discussion. And by pushing this as a requirement, or by advocating the fact that if you want to have valuable data, for example, for policymakers, you need to have this diversity of participants. Otherwise, you really are creating a bias on the data that you collect. And by pushing on this as a criteria for funding schema, or a desirable indicator for the evaluation of the project, we saw an important increment in the attention provided to this topic. So, for example, out of 34 projects in the Impetus project, 29 engage with vulnerable and underrepresented groups, 25 are female lead. So now we have the opposite problem of having men leading a project, which is, of course, something we will need to address. I will just go very, very quickly. We developed a methodology that is a multidimensional, is quantitative, but is also very flexible, modular, and, let's say, operationalized, in the sense ready to be used to people that are not experts, are not social scientists, because sometimes we need to give the instrument, and we think it's a way to empower the community that do citizen engagement to be able to also make those instruments for them. But of course, we agree with the limitation that we just said about the classical instrument like surveys or observations, of course. We will investigate more soon, so I just want to have the audience and also the colleagues be aware that we have 2 new projects that works on these topics. So one is Part Art for Ocean and Water, which will finance 19 projects that will need to have by design, art, science, and citizen participation in them. working on ocean literacy and ocean protection, and Paysetter, in which Professor Sackholz is involved, that is working exactly on the study on how cultural and creative industries can support transition by inspiring them, by inspiring the transition, by becoming more sustainable themselves, but especially by providing new paradigms for the transition.
Thank you very much, Antonella. I had a question to you, but before doing it, I would like to wrap up somehow. First of all, I really thank you very much for the prompts of inspiration that have been given for further discussion, and I really hope that the recording of this workshop will provide more accessibility, since we are not so many. Then I would also say that the survey was performed just during the summer, but we thought of having something with like a focus group to discuss between experts the gaps for further research, or even for cultural engagement to the extent of behavioral change. And so we are planning this discussion between experts, and we will contact you if you want to participate within E3S. And also we are planning of having somehow deeper insight in this topic within an Elsevier issue, a specific issue, special issue on these topics, dealing also with creative and smart cities. Smart cities are not necessarily creative, but it will be maybe in collaboration with another joint program, the Smart City Joint Program. So there will be a call for contribution, and of course we will let you know. So I wanted to just to thank you all, and it's a pity we didn't have a huge discussion, but we were not so many as we expected, but of course we recorded and took notes, and this discussion will be used anyway further. Just a quick question to Antonella: do you think that citizen science can be used for research really, and that it can somehow feed research databases and scientific databases? Just a yes or no.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of evidence on this.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, you have evidence of this. So thank you very much. Also on behalf of Alessandro, who had to leave, and really hope to keep in contact with all of you, with the speakers and the auditors as well. Thank you.
Thank you.